Hey, look at that title. Hey, is it true that long-winded titles scare audiences off? I'm of the opinion that prior to this year, the best year for comic book movies in terms of quality was 2014, which gave us The Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, and X-Men Days of Future Past. That was quite an impressive trio of releases, and I think getting all three of them in one year is a large part of why this genre only continues to get bigger and bigger. Now, I think we're in an even better year for the genre, with the first great DC movie in nearly a decade, a sequel to Guardians that I think managed to surpass the original, even if I'm the only one, the only X-Men film better than Days of Future Past, come at me bros, and there was even a charming little animated Batman comedy somewhere in there. As the number of superhero films released per year increases, so do the odds that one is going to come out that leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. That hasn't occurred once yet with 4 out of 7 releases is impressive. Oh, did I say 4? I meant 5, because Spiderman Homecoming absolutely sticks the landing and gives us not only another real good movie, but in my opinion, the best Spiderman movie.
Oh, hell no!
Yeah, shock and awe. Let's just establish the one statement that's bound to get this video all of its dislikes right off the bat. I don't think it's actually hard to be the best Spiderman movie, since in my humble opinion, not a one of the Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield pieces is really all that great. Really, I think every single one of the webhead's theatrical appearances has been varying degrees of okay. The first Raimi film just isn't to my taste, and doesn't seem to have a clue what it's doing in its back half. The second is an enjoyable experience, but really falls apart when you start asking for any sense out of character actions and motivations. Plus, the romance is just awful. The third is an overstuffed bit of fluff. Amazing 1 I enjoyed a fair amount, though there's quite a few creative choices that don't gel with me, and Amazing 2, although I don't hate it, certainly not as much as the poor saps who had to pay money for it, is a hot mess that tries to accomplish like 6 different things and does maybe one of them with any competence. This movie, though, this is gonna sound weird to say, but while I would rank this beneath films like Guardians Volume 2, Wonder Woman, and Logan, it's pretty much everything I've been asking for out of a Spiderman movie, and everything I could have hoped for, especially based on how Homecoming sold itself. Actually, I want to talk about how it sold itself for a minute, because never have I had more cause to retroactively admit begrudging respect for what I initially saw as a real obnoxious ad campaign. Not only do moments that are quote-unquote ruined for myself and others in trailers play out with a surprising amount of tension in context, there are multiple shots in the trailers that aren't actually in the film. And so my suspicions that the movie might go a certain way really weren't remotely a detriment to my experience in the theater. Back to the point though, the most apt way to describe how much I appreciated a lot of this film's choices would be saying it felt like a movie-length episode of Spectacular Spider-Man. Of course, not everything is the same, but the way both adaptations feel like such a quintessential take on the mythos pleasantly surprised me. I never thought any adaptation of Peter Parker would come close to dethroning Josh Keaton, a voice actor who captures Spiderman as perfectly for me as Mark Hamill does the Joker, but even if Tom Holland doesn't quite do it, he still comes the closest. The ultimate testament to Holland's performance is that despite being very obviously a super attractive and charming kid, I completely buy him as the kind of guy that his peers would make fun of or just be kind of put off by. Not just because his superhero duties make him quite the flake in social situations, but also because he does come off as kind of a nervous dweeb, though thankfully not borderline creepy to the extent of Maguire's take on Peter. This is almost the exact same effect that the Spectacular cartoon managed to achieve, letting Peter come off as a luckless loser even as Keaton's voice acting never lost a layer of genuine coolness. It's a perfect balance that not many mainstream takes on the character have managed to strike. Some lean too charming and confident like Garfield in a 90s cartoon, some lean too maladjusted or put upon like Maguire, or there's the third option, which is to take the character's sense of humor and blow it up to the point that it's his defining characteristic and his whole show comes off as an aloof bonkers comedy with zero stakes. Holland's take thankfully doesn't fall too far in any direction, and if it was too soon to say in Civil War, then I think Homecoming definitely earns the now trite accolade that this feels like the first time I'm seeing the real Peter Parker in a movie. On a slight tangent, this movie also gets a ton of geek points from me for incorporating an iconic Spider-Man visual that's yet to be done in any of these movies in a real creative way. Not only did it make for a great moment of fan service, but it comes paired with a genuine, almost uncomfortable moment of acting from Holland when Peter is at his lowest point. The movie deftly manages to avoid that one problem that I made a whole video about, watch that please because I'm not going to clarify what I'm talking about here, by having it so that even though Peter does need to learn a lesson about what type of hero he wants to be by the end, it doesn't feel like I had to wait the whole movie to get Spiderman. To be fair, none of the Spiderman movies thus far, regardless of their faults, have had the issue of not having their Spiderman figured out for more than half a film. But this one had the biggest chance of falling into that trap. But no, even though Peter does have a very clear character arc about changing his outlook and priorities to be a better Spiderman, he is still Spiderman as early as the film's first major action sequence. He has to grow up and learn to put things ahead of himself, but it's in a way that all kids do. It's very much a coming-of-age story and not a selfish jerk gets redeemed story. Marvel knows how to give their protagonists compelling arcs, and the more I noodle on it, the more I can appreciate just how much thought was taken on the story's part to really take advantage of Peter being a child in a more than superficial way. Speaking of Peter's arc, that's a great segue to talking about the film's villain, seeing as my favorite thing about him is how he's a villain who not only makes good points, but who the hero genuinely learns from. And not in the ironic Peter learns from the Vulture's failures to learn sort of way, but Peter actually adopts some of the Vulture's philosophy, and that's treated as a good thing by the narrative way. Superhero stories never do that, or almost never. I suppose it's only fitting, though, as Adrian Toomes is by far the most sympathetic villain any of these films has had. His motivations aren't too lofty or too petty. He doesn't seem eager to hurt anyone, but because of Michael Keaton's performance and his brilliant costume, he's still a terrifying screen presence. Oh, you think I'm joking? You think I'm kidding around? Just thinking about some of this guy's scenes makes me want to poop my pants. Everything about his scenes in the last third of the film especially go out of their way to make it so that the tension is maxed out whenever he and Peter are in proximity, whether that be with acting, lighting, or just props. The assertion that he's the best villain these movies have had since Loki rubs me a little wrong, since I still give the absolute top spot to Ultron. But because of the sheer amount of time dedicated to him, I give him one over on other villains I enjoy like Zemo or Caecilius. I can totally see where people who hold Marvel's villains as a constant criticism would be inclined to make Vulture an exception. He's absolutely as good as Dafoe's Goblin or Molina's Octopus ever got. That being the case, I'm more than happy with how we handled the character by the end of the film, especially since it really caught me off guard. Marvel seems to be making a real effort with their baddies in Phase 3, and I am digging it. Pacing-wise, I admire just how much really happens without the movie feeling either overstuffed or too brisk. I felt like I got to live in Peter Parker's corner of the world for the exact right amount of time. We get enough of his life in high school for the movie to live up to its promises of John Hughes, but also enough time spent on action that Peter has multiple confrontations with the Vulture that all feel like events because of how they've been built up. It's almost like I've just watched 3 movies, but without ever feeling like it's went on too long, if that makes any sense. It's a real dense story, is what I'm saying. To touch on the high school thing, Peter's classmates and teacher make for real fun support characters. Ned Leeds is a lovable and useful sidekick whose friendship with Peter is remarkably genuine. Zendaya's Michelle is hilariously aloof, Liz Allen is a decent though not particularly special love interest, and Flash Thompson is a huge deviation from other adaptations, but in a way that feels necessary. Seeing as the meathead jock who picks on the nerdy kid for being nerdy isn't really something that exists anymore in modern high schools. Trust me guys, I know this for a fact. All the jocks in my school were like the best dudes. Outside of the school there's Tony Stark, who yes is absolutely a supporting character here. The way he goes about earnestly trying to be a father figure to Peter is great and honestly really relatable. There are multiple points throughout the film where both Tony and even the Vulture have lines or deliveries or even just facial expressions that remind me of my own dad. And it was upon realizing that I knew the film was picking up on something universal with the motif of fatherhood, more so than any of the many other MCU films that broach that subject. Peter mostly speaks to Tony through Happy Hogan, who I personally find obnoxious in the same way I did back in Iron Man 3, but that's kind of the point of the character. Marissa Tomei is great as a supportive but also authoritative Aunt May, and rounding things out is Peter's AI, Karen. How these movies keep managing to make computer programs into endearing characters I'll never know, but hey, they did it again. And they managed to really turn me around on a concept that I was not sold on going in. On a more technical note, I think Spiderman 2, if nothing else, does still hold the crown for best action sequences in the franchise. It may partially be because Homecoming still has the same "this looks too glossy and rubbery to be Tom Holland in the suit even though it probably is" issue that Civil War had effects-wise. But the action here, while consistently tense to the point where I was honestly kind of stressed, just isn't the most dynamic or visually interesting that these movies have gotten. The climax does feel rather rough on Peter, as these movies really like to do, but while I'm more impressed here than I was for most of the Amazing films, and especially the first Raimi film, there's just something missing in comparison to other superhero movies of this year as far as the fights go. It's just good Spiderman action. Maybe I'm just too inundated with good Spiderman action to really appreciate it on the big screen anymore, who knows. Musically, I think Michael Giacchino has created a theme for Spider-Man that's at least as good as his theme for Doctor Strange, which coming from me means it's really appropriate and I hope his future appearances stick with it. Really, looking forward to the future is the perfect encapsulation of this film, because more than ever before I'm excited for the further adventures of this character, especially because of the final shot of the film, which is probably the biggest status quo shift any adaptation of Spider-Man has pulled off. If the future holds more like Homecoming, then the future is bright, and if Sony is smart, they'll continue the hands-off approach. See it. So, that little tease has probably got you interested in my thoughts on certain spoilers, eh? Well, lucky for you, I'm going to be a part of a discussion video all about the nooks and crannies of this movie, which should end up being posted to this very channel relatively soon. If you want a bit more in-depth discussion on this movie from me, then you should subscribe so that you can be made aware of when that's put up. On top of that, take a look at some of my other content, including a ranking of all the other MCU movies, reviews of my favorite show, Doctor Who, and requests, which you can feel free to make in the comments. Until then, I'll see you when I see you.